Hello again. In the last class, we looked at how to create databases with GUI and using code. We also touched on how to create a table using GUI. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to create a table with code, with SQL commands. Now, to create the table using code, we have to open the query editor. You remember we did that in the last video by clicking on tools and clicking on query tool, or by right clicking on a database and clicking on query tool. So the syntax for creating a table is quite lengthier than that of creating a database, which is just create database and database name. So the first thing to do when you're creating a table is to first know we are using the create table statement. So you can see the syntax down here. The syntax is create table, then the table name. Now, the clause if not exist helps us counter an error and checks the database if that table exists before or not. So say, for example, I'm creating a new database and I want to call my database customer table. And I enter my code, create table, customer table. If I do not put if not exist, if that customer table exists before then, and I try creating a table with the same name, it's going to throw an error. But the if not exist clause helps me counter that error and checks Postgres database first to see if that table exists or not. So if it exists, it doesn't create that table again. But if it does not exist, it goes ahead to create that table. So also we know our table contains rows and columns. Yeah. So we have to specify all our columns in our table. So my table is going to have some number of columns, right? So you have to specify a column, the data type of that column, and column constraints. So column constraints really are constraints that are bound, or rules that are bound to each column. So I could create a new column for customer ID and say that's my primary key. So that's a rule. Postgres knows that that's my primary key. So that's a constraint bound to that column. I could make it a column my secondary key, or my foreign key rather, my foreign key. I could also specify that a column should not contain null values. So that's another rule I could place on my column. So let's go ahead. Let's create a column, or a table rather, using SQL commands. So in this example, we are going to be creating 3 tables. Now I'm going to be doing the first 2 myself, and the third one is going to be an in-class assignment. So I'll be creating the accounts table, and I'll be creating the rows table. Then everyone is expected to create this table on their own as an in-class assignment. So the first table I'm going to be creating is accounts, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fields, so 6 columns in it. So the syntax is create table. Well, I didn't specify if not exist here, but my table name is accounts. Now, my first column is user ID. And remember I talked about serial data type, where I said that if the values in that column is meant to be incremental, so maybe user ID 1 is for the first user. When the next user enters, automatically is assigned user ID 2. The next person is assigned user ID 3, and incremental like that. And I'm specifying that that is my primary key. User ID is my primary key. So that's a constraint I'm placing on user ID. That's a constraint I'm placing on user ID. So my next field is username. And username could be a name of a person, and well, it's characters. It could be variable characters to contain any type of characters. My username could be Daniel243. So variable characters, it should accept any type of character. And I'm specifying the length. in a bracket, specifying the length in a bracket that I'm expecting nothing more than 50 characters. I also specified that it's unique, so I'm not expecting any repeated characters because everybody should have different usernames, and I don't want any null value, so not null as well. Same thing for password. I mean, password could come in any character, so I'm going with variable characters. I'm going with a length of 50, and I don't expect the password to be null as well. Email, also variable characters. I'm specifying a length of 255 here, and emails should be unique because no two people have the same email addresses, and I'm not expecting null value, so that's my constraint. Now, created on. Now, this will be the time the user is created in the system. So this is just a sample for maybe a software company that has maybe something like the social media softwares we have where you sign up. So this is when the user is created, and there's a data type called timestamp. So these are date and time data types. So the timestamp specifies the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, and the second that particular user is created. So it's created on, and then there is not null. And my last login is also timestamp. There's no constraint on this at all. So it's just last login, and then my data type is timestamp. So if there's no constraint on your column, on your field, you could just leave it bare. There's no rule that says there has to be a constraint on a field. So I just thought to point that out. So I'm going to head to pgadmin, and let's create this table in pgadmin. So we're creating a table called account. So let's do a practical. So first thing, I want to create it in my test database, test DB database. So I'm going to right click on that and click on query tool to open a new query tool. So the syntax goes like this: create table. The table name is accounts. So accounts, and that's my table name, accounts with an S. That's my table name. And I open my brackets. I press enter just to give it some space, just so I can write things here. I press tab to move just so it's indented properly. And so I want to specify also, just for learning purposes. I know the table accounts does not exist, just for learning purposes. Specify if not exists. So there you go. So my first column is user ID, and it's a serial data type, and it's a primary key. So it's user ID. User ID, that's my column name. It's serial data type, serial, and it's the primary key. I like my keywords being in upper cases. Serial data type, and it's the primary key. So primary key. So I've created the first field. The next field is username. It's variable character, and it's unique and not null. So username varchar. Remember, we have to specify the length of the varchar, so I'm specifying 50, and then specifying that it has to be unique, so no two persons would have the same username, and not null, so nobody is going to skip it and not enter a value there. So not null. My next field is a password, also variable character, and then not null. So password, also varchar, and let's give 50 as well. Not null. The next is created on, and this is a timestamp. Okay, email. Sorry, I skipped email. So the next is my email. Email. Now, email is also going to be variable character. I think I went for 255 there, just in case some people have really long email addresses. And email is going to be unique because no two people have the same email addresses. Well, ideally, the two people should have the same email addresses, and then not null as well. Then the next is created on, and this is a timestamp, like I said, timestamp, and it's also not null because everybody has to have a time when they were created as long as you're users. So the last is last login. Last login, and this is a timestamp as well. So now this is the end of my query. I've written my query. I'm going to close it with a semicolon, and I'm going to run this. So let me just look through to be sure everything is correct. Not exists, account, okay, it seems right. So I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to run it, and then you can see it's telling me my query returned successfully in 19 millisecond. So if I expand test DB here, and remember I said table is under schemas, I can see that I don't think it's refreshed yet. So I click on this and I click on refresh, and then you can see my accounts table is here. It's right here. Let me compress the student score, the former table we created. So my accounts table is right here, created with code. And if I check my columns, I can see my 6 columns: user ID, username, password, email, created on, and last login date. So I've been able to create my table accounts using code. So let's look at creating the second table, because I promised to create the first two and then have you create the third one. So let's look at creating the second table. Now this is a really small table. It's just 2 columns, role ID and role name. So role ID is a serial because it's incremental, like I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100, 101, 102, 103. It's incremental. And the role name, it's a variable character because it's a name. So primary key here is the role ID. So let's create that, and then you would create the third one yourself as an in-class assignment. So let's start. So I don't have to create a new query tool for this. I could just go to the next line and enter my create table if not exist as well, if not exists, and this is called rows. So the table name is called rows. So I open my brackets, press enter just so I can enter my fields. I press tab just to create that indentation. So my first column is my role ID. It's a serial and it's my primary key. So I enter role ID. It's a serial and it's my primary key as well. So that is done. For the next field, it's row name. It's a variable character. It's row name. I feel like I should put an indentation or between the two, just so it's readable. Row name. It's a variable character. Specifying a length of 255 for that. Now it's unique and it's not null. Unique. Sorry, I like it in capital letter. Unique and not null as well. So this is my second. So I would end this with a semicolon. So I'm going to highlight the query I want to run. I'm highlighting the query I want to run, and I'm going to, everything looks good. I'm going to execute that. And then query returned successful in 79 milliseconds. So that's just to show you that I don't have to wipe everything clean before I write another query. I could write a lot of query here, and just as long as I'm ending each query with a semicolon, showing Postgres that that's the end of one query and the beginning of another, and then I highlight the query I want to run when I want to run it, I'm fine. So let's refresh tables here and see if it's updated. So if I close, so I can see my row table is updated here right now. You can see my two columns, role ID and row name. So that is done. So let's try our hands on the third one. It's quite easy. You can pause the video and try your hands on the third one. In the next video, I'm going to just do a brief should I call it explanation on the third video. It's quite easy to follow though, but I'm going to do an explanation on the third video, on the third table, just as a form of just so we can look through it and compare what we did and what I did, to see in case we get it wrong. Well, it's quite easy. You should all get it right. So pause the video, try your hands out on the third one, and we'll see in the next video. Thank you.